20 minutes to 6 on a Tuesday morning, and I was sitting in my own driveway with the engine off, a suitcase behind the seat, and the porch light still burning over a door I painted myself. My wife of 21 years was asleep upstairs. In my shirt pocket was an index card, folded twice, gone soft at the creases from 9 days in the hands of a man who could not stop reading it. 4 words printed in pencil, a date written above them, and neither the handwriting nor the date belonged to my wife. I didn't slam a single door that morning. I didn't have to. Because 3 weeks earlier, without her noticing once, I had quietly started writing everything down. My name is Marcus. I've been a licensed land surveyor in Fenmore, Ohio for 27 years, which means people pay me to walk into a wet field and find the exact place where one man's property stops and another man's begins. It isn't glamorous work. Half of it is standing in knee-high grass with a transit and a thermos. The other half is paperwork nobody reads until there's money on the table, and then everybody reads it. I carry a yellow field book in my back pocket. I write in pencil, and before I put down a single number, I date the page in the top right corner. Pen runs when it rains. Memory runs all the time. My father did it that way, and his crew chief did it before him, and in 27 years I have never once been the man in the courtroom who couldn't prove where he was standing. I met Vivian in the spring of '99 on a shoulder off Route 9 where a developer wanted 11 acres of soybeans turned into a strip mall. She was 26, wearing brand new boots that hadn't earned a single scuff yet, holding a set of drawings upside down and absolutely refusing to admit it. I turned them around for her. She said thank you like I'd insulted her, and then she laughed, and that was it for me. That was the whole story right there in 10 seconds. We got married 18 months later in a church basement because the church itself was booked. Her mother cried. My Uncle Rudy got the hiccups during the vows. We had $211 in a joint account and a rented duplex with a furnace that sounded like a man clearing his throat. 21 years later, we had a brick ranch on Weller Road, a daughter named Nell who was 19 and studying occupational therapy 200 miles away, and a kitchen table I'd built out of white oak the winter Nell turned 4. That table had a burn ring on the corner from a Thanksgiving casserole dish, and Vivian would not let me sand it out. She said the ring was the proof. I never asked proof of what. I thought I already knew. The night her father passed, she didn't cry in the hospital and she didn't cry in the car. She sat down on the garage steps in her coat and just stopped. And I sat down next to her and I counted. That's a habit of mine. When a silence gets long, I count it, the same way I'd count paces across a lot line. 16 minutes. She held on for 16 minutes before she broke, and I held on right there beside her, and I have never told a living soul that I counted. Here's the thing about my line of work that most people never think about. A boundary isn't a wall and it isn't a fence. It's an agreement. There's an iron pin in the ground and there's a paper on file at the county, and both neighbors have decided to believe the same thing about where the line falls. That's all it is. A boundary only holds if both people agree where it is. Vivian worked at Ashcroft & Lyle, an engineering firm downtown, with 40-some employees and a lobby that smelled like new carpet. 13 years, she gave them. She started answering phones and clawed her way up to Director of Business Development, which meant she was the one who went out and won the work everybody else got paid to do. She was good at it. She was better than good. Last spring, she brought in a transit corridor package worth $41 million, and the firm put a picture of the ribbon cutting on the wall by the elevators. Vivian was in the third row of that picture, half behind a man's shoulder. She wanted her name on the letterhead. Principal, not director. She'd say it out loud sometimes while she was loading the dishwasher, like she was testing how it sounded in our house. Real quick, if this story's pulling you in, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and give the video a like. It helps more than you know. Alright, back to it. The first thing that changed wasn't a lipstick stain, and it wasn't a strange number. Nothing that obvious. It was the charger. For 19 years, that woman charged her phone on the nightstand 2 feet from her head. Then, sometime in February, she started charging it on the hall table downstairs, face down, and she said it was because the light was keeping her up. The light had been keeping her up for 19 years. I wrote that down. Not in a notebook labeled anything, not in some folder marked evidence, just a line in my field book, on a Wednesday page, in the top corner where I put the date. Phone moved downstairs. That's all. I've spent my whole life recording things I didn't understand yet, because the meaning comes later and the measurement has to be taken now. Then it was the way she said the word, we. She'd come home and say, we're taking a harder position on the escalation clause, we're not letting them push the schedule. And I'd nod, and something in the back of my skull would tick because it wasn't the firm's we, it was smaller than that. It was a two-person we. A man knows the difference. He just doesn't want to. March 11th, she said she'd been at a zoning meeting in Fenmore that ran late. That Saturday, I cleaned out the console of her car looking for the tire gauge, and I found a parking receipt from a garage on 3rd Street in Columbus. Time stamped out at 11:48 p.m. Columbus is an hour and 40 minutes from that zoning meeting. I didn't confront her. I know that's the part that makes people yell at the screen. I sat in her car in my own garage with that little slip of paper in my hand, and I did the only thing I've ever known how to do when something doesn't add up. I got out my field book. I dated the page. And I wrote down the garage name, the timestamp, the plate on the receipt, and the mileage on her odometer. Then I put the receipt back exactly where I found it, tucked under the tire gauge at the same angle, and I closed the console. And I went inside and made her a cup of tea because she said she had a headache. Before I go any further, I want to hear from you. If you'd been standing in that garage holding that receipt, would you have gone straight in the house and asked her? Or would you have waited? Tell me in the comments what you would have done, because I've thought about it every day since. 9 days later, I took her charcoal work coat to the cleaner on Delmar, the one that's been in the same storefront since before I was born. I always check the pockets. 27 years of finding pencil stubs and lens caps in my own coats will do that to a man. Inside chest pocket, down in the seam, there was an index card. Folded twice. Standard white blue ruled, the corners spurred soft like it had been opened and closed 100 times. And when I unfolded it, I was not looking at my wife's handwriting. Hers is fast and slanted and half cursive. This was block capitals, pressed down so hard with a pencil that I could feel the letters on the back of the card with my thumb. A man's hand. A date across the top. And beneath the date, 4 words. I'm not going to tell you those 4 words yet. Not to keep you sitting here. You've got better things to do than let a stranger jerk you around. I'm not telling you because when I read them that afternoon, standing in the parking lot of a dry cleaner with a garment bag over my arm, I got them completely wrong. I heard them one way, and the way I heard them cost me 4 more months and 1 recorded phone call before I understood what that card actually was. I did not put it back. That's the one thing I did differently, and I've never been able to explain why. I slid that card into my field book, behind the cover, and I hung her coat in the closet when it came home on Thursday, like nothing on this earth had changed. 3 nights later, at 1014 in the morning, I woke up because the bed was empty. And when I came out to the top of the stairs, the hall closet was open and my wife was standing in the dark with that charcoal coat off the hanger, going through the pockets. Inside, outside. Then inside again, slower, with 2 fingers, the way you check a wound. I counted. 2 minutes and 11 seconds she stood there. Then she hung the coat back up and she came back to bed and she lay down beside me shaking. And here's what took me the rest of the night to work out. She wasn't shaking because she thought I'd found something. She was shaking because that card was never hers to lose. Somebody gave it to her. And whoever he was, she was a whole lot more afraid of him than she was of me. I lay there until the window turned gray and I never once let my breathing change. She fell asleep somewhere around 3. I could tell by her hand. It opened. In the morning, I made eggs the way I always make eggs, and she came down in her robe and kissed the top of my head on her way to the coffee pot, and she asked if I'd remember to call about the gutters. I said I'd call Thursday. She said Thursday was fine. And here's the thing, I meant it. I did call about the gutters. A man can be coming apart at the seams and still keep his appointments. Sometimes the appointments are the only thing holding the seams. I want you to understand what I did next, because a lot of men would have gone at it a different way. I did not follow her. I did not put anything on her car. I did not read her phone. I did not call her office pretending to be somebody I wasn't. Every one of those things is what a scared man does, and a scared man makes noise. What I did was open the field book to a clean page and start a table. 4 columns. And date. What she told me. What the odometer said. What I could verify without her ever knowing I looked. That 3rd column is the one people underestimate. I have driven every road in 3 counties with a wheel that counts my steps. I know that her office and back is 19.4 miles. I know the Fenmore Municipal Building and back is 26. I know Columbus and back on I-71 is 198, give or take the exits. So when she told me she'd been at the office until 9 and that odometer had turned over 204 miles since Sunday, I didn't need to accuse anybody of anything. The truck told me, numbers don't have a temper. That's why I've trusted them my whole life. But it was the card that broke my first theory wide open, and it happened in the cab of my own truck in a gravel turnaround off County Road 12, eating a sandwich with the heater running. I'd read those 4 words maybe 40 times by then. What I had not done, not once, not properly, was look at the date above them. It wasn't from that winter. It wasn't from that year. That date was 4 years old. 4 years and 1 month before the night my wife stood in the dark going through her own coat pockets. 4 years ago, Vivian was still fighting for a parking spot that wasn't in the back lot. 4 years ago, she came home on a Friday and cried at the sink because a man in a meeting had called her the girl who brings in the work. 4 years ago, whatever that card was, it already existed, and my wife had not even met the man I was about to find. I found him on a Tuesday, sitting in the truck outside a bank in Fenmore with my phone in my hand, looking at the leadership page of Ashcroft and Lyle like a coward. It took 11 seconds. Roland Ashcroft, managing principal. 61 years old in the photograph, silver hair cut close, one of those faces that's been photographed enough to know exactly what to do. And I knew that shoulder. That was the shoulder my wife was standing half behind in the ribbon-cutting picture on the wall by the elevators, the picture she'd made me drive downtown to see, the picture she was so proud of that she took a photo. She wasn't hiding behind him in that frame. I'd had it backwards for a year. She'd been standing as close to him as the 3rd row would allow. Listen, if you're still with me and this story's got a hold of you, a like and a subscribe would mean a lot. It's the whole reason I can keep telling these. Now, the part I have to be honest about, because if I skip it, I'm no better than she was. That Saturday, she made pot roast. She made pot roast because Nell called on video from her apartment 200 miles away, and Vivian carried the laptop around the kitchen showing our daughter the meat thermometer and the burn ring on the oak table and the ridiculous ceramic rooster her mother gave us in 2004. She laughed with her whole chest. She asked Nell 4 questions about a professor she was scared of. And I sat at the end of that table with a folded index card in my back pocket, and I watched my wife be, without one single ounce of pretending, the best mother I have ever known. That's the part nobody warns you about. The betrayal doesn't cancel the love. It just sits down at the table next to it and eats off the same plate. Monday, I drove to the county building on 3rd and Vine and asked for the public file on the transit corridor. That's all it takes, by the way. You walk in, you sign the clipboard, you sit at a laminate table under a light that buzzes, and a woman named Doreen brings you a box. It's public. Anybody's tax dollars, anybody's file. I told myself I was going for one reason, to find her name on an attendance sheet next to his. On one of the nights she said she was somewhere else. Small. That's genuinely what I went in there for. I found it in 20 minutes. A pre-bid site walk, 7:40 in the morning on a Thursday in October, 12 signatures on the sheet. Hers, in that fast slanted half cursive. His, 4 lines below it. And then I turned the page and I stopped being a jealous husband and started being a surveyor. Because underneath the sign-in sheet was a small business participation certification. 1 page. A promise, in writing, that 18% of the work on a $41 million public job would go to a 2-man engineering outfit up in Marion. It's a serious document. When a firm signs that, the county leans on it and the public leans on the county. It was signed by an authorized representative of Ashcroft and Lyle, and the authorized representative was Vivian. I'd been around these jobs for 27 years. I know exactly who signs that form at a 40-person firm. A principal signs it. A licensed man with his name on the door signs it because when it goes wrong, the county doesn't call the office, it calls whoever's name is on that line. Her name was on that line. His name was on the door. And then I went back through the box, slower, and I found the monthly participation reports. 18% promised. 2.1% actually paid out 11 months in. That two-man outfit in Marion had gotten one drainage study and a thank you. I sat in that little room with the buzzing light for a long time. Doreen asked twice if I needed a copier. I said no, thank you, and I got out my field book and I dated the page in pencil in the top right corner, and I wrote down every form number by hand. Because here's what I understood at that laminate table, and it went through me like cold water. My wife wasn't just having an affair with that man. My wife was the paper he was standing on. Let me ask you something before I go on, because I've never settled it in my own head. At that exact moment, sitting in a county office, holding proof that the woman who broke my heart was also being set up to take a fall she didn't fully see coming, would you have warned her? Or would you have let it come? Tell me honestly in the comments. I read every single one. I chose to warn her. I want that on the record, whatever else you decide about me by the end of this. I drove home with those form numbers in my back pocket, and my whole plan was to put a glass of wine in her hand and say, Viv, there's something on that project with your signature on it, and you need a lawyer who isn't his lawyer. The kitchen light was on. Her car was in the drive. I came in through the side door the way I always do, and I stopped in the hallway with my hand still on the knob, because she was standing at the sink with her back to me and the phone against her ear. Her voice was low and very calm, calmer than I'd heard it in months. She said, Roland, if any of this comes apart, I'll say it was mine. All of it. That's what I'm telling you. And then, after a pause, quieter, no. I know. Nothing in writing. I backed out of that hallway the same way I came in, heel first, hand still on the knob so the latch wouldn't speak, and I stood on the concrete step in the dark with the storm door held 2 inches off the frame. Then I counted. 40 seconds. That's how long a man needs to decide who he's going to be for the rest of his marriage. At 41 seconds, I let the storm door bang the way it always bangs, and I stamped my boots on the mat like there was mud on them, and I came into my own kitchen calling out that the gutter fellow wanted 380, and I told him he was dreaming. She turned around from the sink with the phone already face down on the counter, and she smiled at me. Not a guilty smile, not a cut smile, a tired, warm, 21-year smile, the same one she'd been giving me since a shoulder off Route 9. She said 380 was highway robbery, and did I want the last of the chicken? I said yes. I ate the chicken. It was good. The next morning, I tried to warn her anyway. I want you to know that I tried, because everything I did after this, I did knowing she'd had the chance. She was at the mirror by the front door putting on an earring, and I leaned in the doorway with my coffee and I said, Viv, that corridor job. Anything with your signature on it, you ought to have your own attorney look at. Not theirs. Yours. Her hands didn't stop. Not a hitch, not a pause. She put the second earring in, she checked the back of it with her thumb, and she said, Marcus, honey, you survey ditches. She said it kindly. She was laughing when she said it. Let the engineers handle the engineering. Then she kissed me on the mouth, and she picked up her bag, and she was gone by 7:10. I stood in the hall for a while after her car pulled out. I'd been called worse things by better men, and it never landed anywhere near where that landed. Because it wasn't cruel. That's what I couldn't get past. She hadn't insulted me. She'd just genuinely, completely forgotten what I could do. And that, right there, is the whole trouble with being the quiet one in a house. People stop measuring you. They fix you at a number in their head somewhere around year 6, and after that they just carry the old figure forward. A wrong number carried forward long enough starts to look like a fact. So I went to work. Not her work. Mine. I bought a second field book at the hardware store on Delmar, $3.19, and I wrote nothing on the cover. Every page got a date in the top right corner in pencil before a single word went under it. That's not caution, that's just how my hands have worked since I was 22. Date it, then write it. Rain washes out the rest. And on the first page of that book, I wrote a question I had never once thought to ask. If he needed a director's signature on that form, whose signature was he using before hers? Because a man doesn't invent a system at 61. A man who's 61 runs the system he's been running. It took me 4 visits to the county building and 1 to the state archive out on Sawyer Road. Doreen started keeping a chair pulled out for me. She thought I was doing a boundary history. I let her think it. I found it on the second Thursday in April. A water treatment expansion, $12.4 million, awarded to Ashcroft and Lyle 4 years earlier. Same county. Same shape of job. And in the same place, in the same kind of file, a small business participation certification, 1 page, promising 14% to a soils outfit up in Marion. 14% promised. 3.4% paid. The soils outfit filed a written complaint, and 11 months later, they withdrew it, and there is no public record anywhere of why. And on the signature line, above the words Authorized Representative, was a name that was not Roland Ashcroft's. Denise Kovar, Director of Business Development. Same title my wife holds. Same line. Same pen. Real quick, before I take you where this went, if this story's got you sitting still, hit subscribe and drop a like on the video. That's the whole engine that keeps these going. Alright, back to it. I sat in that little room under the buzzing light, and I did what I always do when the numbers start pointing somewhere. I laid the 2 forms side by side, and I read them like 2 deeds on the same parcel. They weren't similar. They were identical. Same clause order, same 3 defined terms, same odd little phrase in paragraph 4, good faith, commercially reasonable efforts, sitting in the exact same position on both pages. 4 years apart. 1 template. 1 man feeding it to whichever director he had at the time. He wasn't cutting corners on a project. He built a machine, and the machine needed 1 part he couldn't manufacture himself. It needed a signature that wasn't his. That's the piece the county never sees. When that form goes bad, the investigator doesn't go looking for the man on the door. He goes looking for the hand on the line. And the hand on the line is always somebody who is so grateful to be asked that she didn't stop to read paragraph 4. I thought about my wife saying the word principal out loud over a dishwasher rack, testing how it sounded in our house. And for the first time since that parking lot at the dry cleaner, I felt something come up in me that wasn't anger. I looked for Denise Kovar the honest way. No tricks, no pretending. I found a professional profile with nothing on it since that autumn, and I found a Denise Kovar working the front counter at a title company in Marion, which, if you know anything about my business, is about the saddest, quietest landing a woman with her resume can make. Title counter is where the paper goes to be filed by somebody who used to write it. And then I sat back in the truck in that gravel lot with my thumb over her name, because something in the back of my skull had started ticking again, the way it ticks when a fence line runs 6 feet off from where the deed says it ought to. I'd heard that name before. Not in a file. In my own kitchen. The previous spring, May, a Saturday, because I was scrubbing the grill grate, Vivian had come out onto the back steps with her keys in her hand and told me she was driving up to Marion to have lunch with an old colleague. She'd said the name in a flat little voice, the way you say a name you'd rather not explain. Denise. She was gone 5 hours for a lunch that's a 50-minute drive. And when she came home, she didn't say 1 word about it. Not 1. She poured a glass of wine, and she sat down at that oak table, and she put her hand flat on the burn ring and left it there. I remember thinking she looked like a woman who'd just been told a diagnosis. I remember thinking it, and then I got up and finished the grill, because it was May and I was a man with a full life and no reason on God's earth to write it down. I've been over it 1,000 times since, and every time I land in the same place, and every time it takes the wind out of me, that lunch was in May. My wife signed that certification the following April, 11 months later, which means somebody had already sat across a table from her and told her exactly what she was walking into. Somebody who'd walked into it first. Somebody who lost everything doing it. And Vivian came home and she put her hand on our kitchen table and she never told me a thing, and then she went ahead and signed it anyway. I called the title company in Marion on a Wednesday morning from a gravel turnaround off County Road 12, and I did not lie to her once. That mattered to me then, and it matters to me now. I said, my name is Marcus, my wife is Vivian at Ashcroft and Lyle, and I think she's standing where you were standing 4 years ago. I said, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not press, and I'm not recording this. I said, if you hang up, I won't call again. There was a long stretch of nothing on that line. I counted it. 19 seconds. Then Denise Kovar said, is she the one who came up here to see me? We met at a diner off the state route north of Marion, one of those places with laminated menus and a coffee pot that never leaves the table. She was 54, small, with reading glasses pushed up into short gray hair, wearing the kind of cardigan you buy when nobody's photographing you anymore. She'd brought a manila folder and she kept both hands flat on top of it, the whole first 10 minutes like it might get up and leave. She told it plain. Roland brought her up from proposals in 2016. He put her in rooms she had no business being in, and he set her name to people who mattered. She said, and I wrote this in the field book in the truck afterward, word for word, she said he didn't lie to me. That's the thing nobody believes. He just let me believe I was becoming somebody, and then he handed me a pen. The certification came across her desk on a Friday at 4:50. Roland was in Cleveland. The county wanted it by 5. He called her cell and said, "Sign it, we'll paper it Monday." They never papered it Monday. 11 months later, the Soils outfit filed a complaint, and Denise sat in a conference room with 2 men from the county and 1 attorney, Ashcroft and Lyle's attorney, sitting on her side of the table, telling her he was there to help her. And Roland Ashcroft went into that room and told them, honestly and with real sorrow in his voice, that his director of business development had exceeded her authority, that the firm was cooperating fully, and that he was heartbroken to have to say it. She resigned on a Thursday. She got a settlement that came with a page and a half of language about non-disparagement, and she took it because she was 50 and her husband had just had a stent put in and the mortgage doesn't care whose fault it was. Then she turned that manila folder around on the table and slid it across to me with 2 fingers. Inside were 3 pages. Printed emails, 4 years old, from her firm account to his, the one she'd forwarded to herself the week it all came apart, which is the only reason on this earth she still had them. Page 2. Her, at 4:58 on that Friday afternoon, Roland, I'm not comfortable signing the participation, sir, as authorized rep. This should be a principal signature. Him, at 5004, Denise. It's a formality and the window closes at 5. Sign it. If it ever becomes a problem, it's a problem for the firm, not for you. You have my word on that. Gore. I read those 2 lines maybe 6 times in that booth with the coffee going cold in front of me, because I had heard that man's word. I'd heard it come out of my own kitchen sink in my wife's voice 4 nights before. Roland, if any of this comes apart, I'll say it was mine. He hadn't asked her to say that. He didn't have to. He built a man that women promise things to. If you're still riding with me on this one, do me a favor, hit subscribe and give it a like. It genuinely helps. All right. Then Denise took her glasses out of her hair and asked me the question I'd been dreading the whole drive up. She said, "Did she tell you what I gave her?" And I said no. I said my wife came home from that lunch, poured a glass of wine, put her hand flat on our kitchen table, and never said your name again. Denise reached into her purse and took out a blank white index card, blue ruled, and she set it on the laminate between the sugar caddy and the ketchup. She said she'd printed the same thing on a card for herself the week she resigned, in pencil, in block capitals, so she'd stop reciting it in the car. She said she made a second one that day at lunch and pushed it across the table to my wife. And she told me what she'd written above the words. Dough! The date. Not the day of the lunch, the date her own signature went on, that page 4 years earlier. She said, I put the date on it so she'd know exactly how long it takes. I did not take that card out of my pocket. It was 6 inches from my hand the entire time, and I left it right where it was, because I did not trust my face. But I'll tell you what went through me sitting in that vinyl booth, and it was not relief. It was the floor going out. Because for 9 days I had carried that card believing a man gave it to my wife. I'd built the whole thing on the pencil pressure and the block capitals, a man's hand. And a man's hand is what I wanted, because a man's hand meant the card was part of the affair, and if it was part of the affair, then everything in my house was one single wound with one single edge. It wasn't his. It was never his. A woman I'd never met wrote it in a diner in Marion and pushed it across a table as a kindness. Which meant the 4 words on that card had nothing to do with love at all. And I had spent 9 days reading them as the cruelest thing my wife had ever done to me. I got out to the truck and I sat there with my hands on the wheel and I did not start it for a long while. There's no dignity in that part. I'd been so careful. I'd dated every page. I had done everything the right way, and I had still walked around for 9 days with a fact in my pocket pointed at the wrong sky. Denise came out and knocked on my window before she got in her own car. I rolled it down. She said, "She didn't take it, you know." The card. I pushed it across, and she looked at it, and she got up and paid for both of us and left it sitting there. She said, "I put it in her coat pocket in the parking lot." She had her arms full. 5 hours. That's what I kept coming back to on the drive home. A 50-minute drive, a lunch, and my wife was gone. 5 hours. I got back to Fenmore a little after 4, and I did not go home. I drove downtown, and I parked across from the Ashcroft and Lyle lot, and I sat there in a truck with 190,000 miles on it and watched a glass door. At 5:40, she came out. Not alone. And they weren't touching, they weren't standing close, there was nothing in that parking lot a photograph would have convicted anybody of. But I watched him say something to her, and I watched my wife of 21 years nod at a man the way she has never in her life nodded at me, quick, twice, chin down, the way a person nods when they've already agreed to something and are just being reminded of it. And then he handed her a folder, and she put it in her bag, and she looked up and down that lot before she got in her car. That night at dinner, she told me she'd had a quiet day. And I said, "That's good," and I passed her the salt, and I understood, clean and cold and all at once, that I was never going to get the truth out of my wife by asking her for it. So I stopped. Not the looking, the asking. There's a difference, and it took me 27 years in a field to learn it. When two neighbors fight over a fence, you never ask either one of them where the line is. They'll both tell you the truth exactly as they know it, and they'll both be wrong. You go find the monument. An iron pin, a cut stone, a notch chiseled in a curve by a man who's been dead 90 years. The pin doesn't argue, and it doesn't apologize. The pin just sits there being right. So I took that index card out of the field book, and I slid it into the left breast pocket of my work shirt, where I could feel it against my chest when I bent over the tripod. And I went looking for the pin. Thursday morning, I was back at the county building at 8, and Doreen had the box out before I got my jacket off. I said, "Doreen, I'm going to need that copier after all." What I wanted this time wasn't the certification. I'd already read that page until the words came apart. What I wanted was the boring part, the monthly participation reports. 12 of them, one for every month at the job, each one a single sheet, listing what the small firm had been paid that month and what percentage that came to. Nobody reads those. That's the point of them. Every one of them was signed on the bottom line. Authorized representative. Vivian? I laid number 7 and number 9 side by side on that laminate table, and something in the back of my skull started ticking so hard I could hear it. I've overlaid plats on a light table since I was 22 years old. Old surveys, new surveys, a 1948 subdivision against a 2003 resurvey. You put one over the other, you hold them up to the light, and the truth about whether two men measured the same corner shows up in about 4 seconds. So I carried both pages across that little room to the window, and I lined up the signature lines, and I held them up to a gray April sky. Her signature didn't just look similar on those 2 pages. It was the same signature. Every loop, every gap, the little flick where the N runs out of ink at the end, identical, sitting in the exact same spot above the line, 2 months apart. A person cannot sign their name the same way twice. Not once in a lifetime. That's not skill, that's physics. What I was holding was one signature, scanned, dropped onto a form, and printed. I went back through all 12. 4 of them matched that same scan. 8 of them were her real hand, and the difference was so obvious once I saw it that I felt stupid for not seeing it in the first hour. Then I looked at the dates on the 4. Report number 9 was dated Thursday, October the 14th. And I knew that date without checking anything, because on October the 14th, my wife and I were both in Cincinnati, in a surgical waiting room on the 4th floor of Good Samaritan, while her sister Karen had a mass taken off her thyroid. We left Fenmore at 5 in the morning. We got home at 11 at night. Vivian held her sister's coat in her lap for 6 hours and didn't open her bag once. And I could prove it. Not from a calendar, not from a photograph. From my own yellow field book, dated in pencil in the top right corner the way I've dated every page since I was a kid. October 14, and underneath it, in my handwriting, 3 words. No work. Cincinnati. 21 years that woman had watched me date a blank page before I wrote on it. She'd rolled her eyes at it in restaurants. She'd bought me a box of those books for Christmas one year as a joke, wrapped in paper with little cartoon reindeer on it. And now the whole thing had turned around on us both. The habit she found funny was the only clean record in the state of Ohio that put my wife 2 hours south of a document she supposedly signed. If this story's got you sitting still right now, hit subscribe and drop a like on it. That's the whole engine that keeps these going. All right. Now, I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make this sound like I'd found my wife innocent. I hadn't. She signed the original certification. That was her hand, her pen, her choice, made 11 months after a woman in a Marion diner told her exactly what it would cost. Nobody forged that one. She'd been warned, and she went ahead, because the word principal sounded so good in our kitchen that she stopped hearing anything else. But those 4 forged reports told me something about Roland Ashcroft that the certification never could. He didn't need her hand. He had a scan of it, which meant her signature had stopped being something she gave him and started being something he owned. And a man who owns a woman's signature doesn't need her in the building anymore. Before I take you into the last week of my marriage, I want to hear from you, because I have argued with myself about this for over a year now. I was standing at a window holding a page that could take some of the fall off my wife's shoulders, the same wife who was lying to my face every night at my own kitchen table. What do you think I did with that page? Guess in the comments. I'll tell you if you were right before this is over. It came apart at that firm 11 days later, and it did not come apart because of me. The 2-man outfit up in Marion, the ones who got 1 drainage study and a thank you, finally hired an attorney. The attorney did what attorneys do and asked the county for everything. The county opened a compliance review. And Ashcroft and Lyle, which is a 40-person firm with a lobby that smells like new carpet, brought in an outside investigator to conduct what they called an internal look-back. An internal look-back means 2 people from a firm in Cleveland sit in a conference room for 9 days and read every expense report anybody filed for 3 years. They found a corridor conference in Columbus, 2 nights in September, 1 room, booked and paid on a corporate card, submitted for reimbursement by Roland Ashcroft, and on the 2nd night, a restaurant charge on the same card with a receipt that had been signed at the bottom by my wife. I know all of this now. I did not know a word of it then. What I knew then was that on a Tuesday in the 2nd week of May, Vivian came home at 9:40 at night, put her bag on the oak table, sat down without taking her coat off, and told me there was a review going on at work about paperwork on the corridor job and it was probably nothing. And I gave her the door. I want you to understand how wide I opened it, because I have gone back to that kitchen 1,000 times since, and I cannot find 1 more inch I could have given her. I sat down across from her at that table with the burn ring on it, and I put both my hands flat on the wood, and I said, Viv, whatever it is, whatever all of it is, you can say it right here, right now, and I will still be sitting in this chair when you're done. She looked at me for about 3 seconds. And then she said the paperwork thing again, in almost the same words, and she asked if I'd remembered to call about the gutters. I said Thursday. She said Thursday was fine. A boundary only holds if both people agree where it is. I'd said that to myself for a month like it was a piece of clever surveying. Sitting at that table, I finally understood it was a description of my marriage, and that she had quietly moved the pin and that there was nothing left to hold. I packed on Monday night while she was asleep. Took me 19 minutes. A man doesn't need much. Then I sat at that oak table and tore 1 page out of the yellow field book, dated it in the top right corner in pencil, same as always, and I wrote 9 words. I can survive anger. I can't survive indifference. M. I put it under the ceramic rooster her mother gave us in 2004. Then I put the index card back in my shirt pocket and I went out to the truck. That's where you found me at the start of all this. 20 minutes to 6 on a Tuesday morning, engine off, porch light still burning, 9 days of my own thumbprints worn into a card I still had completely wrong. I drove to a motel out on Route 9 with a green sign and a coffee maker bolted to the wall, and for 11 days nobody called me. Not her. Not the firm. Nobody. Then, on the 12th morning, at 6:40, my phone lit up on that motel nightstand with a Fenmore number I didn't recognize. And when I picked it up, the voice on the other end was smooth and unhurried and about as friendly as a hand on your shoulder in a dark parking lot. Marcus, this is Roland Ashcroft. I think you and I want the same thing here. I let it ring. 6 times, then it went quiet, and I sat on the end of that motel bed looking at a phone that had just told me a 61-year-old man knew exactly where I was sleeping. Then I looked something up. In Ohio, a man is allowed to record a conversation he's a party to. That's not a trick, and it's not a trap. It's just the law, and I read it twice on a cracked screen before I set the phone on the nightstand, opened the recorder, and waited. He called back at 7,000. I counted 3 rings before I picked it up because I wanted my voice level, and my voice is never level until I've counted something. He was pleasant. I want to be fair to the man. Roland Ashcroft was pleasant the entire time. He asked how I was holding up. He said this was a hard season for everybody. Then he said, I understand you've spent some time in the county file room. Doreen mentioned a gentleman doing a boundary history. And there it was. He wasn't calling to threaten me. He was calling to let me know that a woman who'd been pulling a chair out for me for a month had mentioned my name at a Rotary lunch, and that in this county his hand reached further than mine. So I asked him a question. 1. The same way I'd ask a man which corner he thinks his fence starts from. I said, report number 9, dated October 14. Who signed that one? He didn't hesitate. Not a breath, not a beat. He said, Vivian did. I said, you're sure about that? And he said, Marcus, I watched her sign it. I had a yellow field book on that nightstand with October 14th dated in pencil in the top right corner and 3 words underneath it in my own hand. No work. Cincinnati. My wife spent that entire day on the 4th floor of a hospital 2 hours south of here with her sister's coat folded in her lap. I didn't say a word about it. You don't tell a man where the pin is. You let him keep pointing at the wrong tree. Then he talked for a while, and honest to God, some of it I understood. He said he had 41 people and their mortgages sitting on top of that door. He said the participation rules were written by people who've never had to make a payroll on a Friday, and that every firm in 3 states does exactly what he does, and the only difference is that his name is on the letterhead, so his name is on the hook. He said, I built that firm out of a rented room over a bakery. My father was a pipe fitter. I'm not going to apologize for keeping the lights on. And I sat there in a motel room on Route 9 and thought, that's a man who has never once in his life said the word no out loud to himself. Then he told me what he wanted. He said there was no reason any of this had to get personal or public. He said the firm would see Vivian right on her way out, that these situations are always cleaner with a separation agreement, and that nobody had any interest in dragging a marriage through a county hearing. And then he said, if it ever becomes a problem, it's a problem for the firm, not for her. She has my word on that. I had read that sentence before. Not something like it. That sentence, in that order, on a printed email 4 years old in a diner booth north of Marion, with a woman sitting across from me who'd taken a job at a title counter because of it. Same clause order. Same defined terms. Same odd little phrase sitting in the exact same place on the page. He wasn't lying to me. He was reading me the template. I told him I'd think about it, and I thanked him for his time, because I was raised right, and then I hung up and saved a 9-minute recording and dated the page. If you're still writing with me this deep into it, hit subscribe and give the video a like. That's the whole engine behind these stories. All right. Now, a while back, I asked you to guess what I did with that page, the one that could take part of the fall off the shoulders of a woman who'd been lying to my face for 4 months. Here's your answer. I made 2 copies at the county building for a dime apiece. I kept the original in the field book because a record you hand away stops being a record. Then I drove to my own house at 4 in the afternoon, in daylight, and I knocked on my own front door. She'd lost weight? That's the first thing. 23 days, and her wedding ring was turning loose on her finger, and she caught me looking at it and put her hand behind her back like a kid. I didn't come in past the kitchen. I laid it all out on that white oak table in order, the way I'd lay out a plat for a client who's about to lose an argument he doesn't know he's in yet. The 2 participation reports overlaid with the identical signature. The photocopy of my fieldbook page from October 14th. Denise Kovar's 3 emails, 4 years old. And on the back of a gas receipt, the name of an attorney in Columbus who has never once had lunch with anybody at Ashcroft and Lyle. I did not ask her about Roland. Not that afternoon, not ever. Not one time in the whole rest of my life have I asked my wife that question, and people find that strange, and I've stopped trying to explain it. She read it standing up, with her coat still on, one hand on the back of a chair. When she got to the October page, she stopped and she reached over, and she put her palm flat on the burn ring on the corner of that table the way she does. And she said, I knew what it was when I signed it. Not a defense, not a story. She said it the way you read a number off a gauge. Then she said, Denise sat there and told me the whole thing, start to finish, and I drove home thinking, she must have done something wrong. She must have missed something. I thought I'd be the one it didn't happen to. And I said the only true thing I had left in me. I said, it's yours now, Viv. All of it. I'm not going to do anything with any of this. It's your name. She asked me if I was coming home. I said not tonight. She didn't ask again. 2 days later, the firm sent the county its written response, and I got a copy the way anybody gets a copy. I signed Doreen's clipboard, and I sat at the laminate table under the buzzing light. 4 pages. Cooperating fully. Deeply troubled. And then the sentence, sitting in paragraph 6 like it had been waiting there for 4 years, the firm's inquiry indicates that a director exceeded the scope of her signature authority. Not a name. He didn't even need a name. There's only one director of business development at that firm, and every soul in that county knew who she was, and by Friday the firm's own attorney had called my wife and offered, very kindly, very warmly, to represent her at the hearing. Same room. Same table. Same man sitting on her side of it, telling her he was there to help. The county set the compliance hearing for a Thursday morning at 9 in the second-floor meeting room at 3rd and Vine, 1 floor above the box Doreen had been pulling for me all spring. Wednesday night at 9:40, my phone rang in that motel room, and it was my wife for the first time in 23 days. She didn't say hello. She said, if I tell all of it, does it help anybody? Or does it just cost more? I told her I'd been surveying for 27 years, and I'd never once seen a wrong line fix itself by being left alone. She asked me to be in the room. I said I would. Thursday morning, I sat in the 3rd row with my hat in my hands, and my wife walked in at 4 minutes to 9 in the charcoal coat, and the firm's attorney stood up and pulled out the chair beside him for her. And she stopped, and she looked at that chair. Counted it. 11 seconds. Then she said, no thank you, and she walked past that chair and she sat down alone at the far end of the table with her coat still on and her hands folded on top of it. The room had 11 people in it. 2 from county compliance, a court reporter, the attorney for the 2-man outfit up in Marion, 3 of Vivian's co-workers, the firm's lawyer, Roland, and me. Roland wore a navy suit and reading glasses on a cord, and he had a legal pad in front of him with nothing written on it. They asked my wife whether she had signed the small business participation certification on the corridor project. She said yes. She said she'd read it, she said she understood what it obligated the firm to do, and she said no one physically forced her hand. Then the woman from compliance asked whether anyone had directed her to sign it. And Vivian said, yes. Roland Ashcroft did. And I want to walk you through all 4 years of it because I don't think you're looking at one form. I think you're looking at a system, and I was the second person in it. Before I take you through what that cost her, if you've made it this far with me, hit subscribe and give this a like. It means more than you know. She talked for 50 minutes. No lawyer, no notes. She gave them the certification. She gave them the monthly participation reports, all 12, and she told them plainly that 4 of those signatures were not put on the page by her hand. And then she reached into her bag and laid down a photocopy of a page out of a yellow field book, dated in pencil in the top right corner. October the 14th. 3 words under it in a surveyor's blocky print. No work. Cincinnati. Behind it, the discharge paperwork from the 4th floor of Good Samaritan with her sister Karen's name on it. I never handed the county a single sheet of paper in my life. My wife did that. I just made 2 copies for a dime apiece and let her decide. The compliance woman turned to Roland and asked him one question. She asked if he stood by the firm's written response. And he did. Of course he did. He'd already put it in paragraph 6 in his own words. A director exceeded the scope of her signature authority, and there is nothing in this world harder for a man like that than walking back a sentence he already got applauded for. He said yes. On the record, with a court reporter's hands moving. He said he had personally observed his director execute those reports. He didn't know. That's the thing I've never been able to shake. He genuinely did not know what he'd just stepped on, because it never once occurred to that man that a woman he'd handed a pen to might be married to somebody who dates a blank page before he writes on it. Vivian lost everything she'd spent 13 years building, and she lost it in about 90 days. The county barred her from acting as an authorized representative on public work for 5 years. The firm terminated her the following Monday, for cause, which meant no severance and no letter. Her name went in the paper twice. She had to write a check to that 2-man outfit in Marion out of her own retirement account, and she did it without being asked, and nobody wrote about that part. She sat at our kitchen table in September and told me she'd applied to 19 places and heard back from none of them, and that she'd started saying, "I used to be in engineering," out loud at the grocery store like it was a diagnosis. And for a while, that looked like the whole ending, because Roland Ashcroft did not lose one thing. The firm paid a penalty, signed a corrective action plan, hired a compliance officer, and kept every dollar of the corridor work. In November, they gave Roland a retirement dinner at a steakhouse on Miller with a plaque and a slideshow. 41 years. His granddaughter read something she'd written. I heard about it from a man on my crew who catered it. I sat in my truck in a gravel turnaround off County Road 12 and ate a sandwich and thought, well, there it is. What goes around doesn't always come around. Sometimes it just goes. The county's compliance certification came out in February. And a false statement made to a public authority on a public contract is its own animal. It doesn't care who your friends are, and it doesn't expire because you had a nice dinner. Roland Ashcroft was indicted in March on 1 count. Not for the participation scheme. Not for the affair, not for the forgeries, not for Denise Kovar, not for any of the things he actually did to 2 women across 4 years. For 1 sentence he chose to write, and then chose to repeat out loud in a room with a court reporter in it. I watched her sign it. Nobody made him add that detail. He put it in because it sounded good. He pled out in July. No prison, a felony, a fine, restitution, and the surrender of his professional license at 62 years old. They took his name off the door in a single afternoon, and I'm told they had to leave the outline of the letters where the sun hadn't reached the brick. Now, the card. I carried it in my left breast pocket for 11 months, and I finally understood it sitting on the tailgate of my truck in a soybean field on a Tuesday, waiting for a cloud to move off my sightline. 4 words, block capitals, pressed hard enough to feel on the back. IT was always you. For 9 days in the spring, I had read that as a love letter. A man's hand, a man's promise, the worst thing my wife had ever done to me. Denise Kovar never wrote a word about love. She wrote the answer to the only question that matters in that whole business when it comes apart: who pays? Not the name on the door. Never the name on the door. It's the hand on the line. The one they were so kind to. The one who was so grateful to be asked that she didn't read paragraph 4. And the date above it wasn't the lover's anniversary either. It was the day Denise's own signature went on a page 4 years and 1 month before my wife's did. She put it there, she told me, so Vivian would know exactly how long it takes. I asked Vivian once, much later, what she thought it meant when she found it in her coat. She said she thought it was a curse. She said she thought that woman was telling her, "You're the same as me." So she buried it in a pocket, and at 1 a.m, she stood in a dark hallway checking with 2 fingers to make sure it was still there. Not because she wanted it, but because she couldn't stand for anyone else to find it. 4 words on a 3-cent index card, sitting in one house, being read wrong by 2 people who loved each other. That's the whole marriage. That's the whole thing, right there. We tried. I want that said. 9 months of a therapist in Bexley on Thursday afternoons, and a rule between us that any question could be asked at any hour and had to be answered all the way down. She kept that rule. Every time. But you can be honest with someone and still not be able to lay a hand on their arm without thinking. A boundary only holds if both people agree where it is, and we agreed, in the end, that ours had moved, and that neither one of us could put the pin back in the ground where it used to be. We separated in the spring at that same table. No shouting. We split the retirement down the middle. She kept the ceramic rooster. She gave me the table. 21 years, and she told me to take the white oak, burn ring and all, and I have it in a rented house off Del Mar with 2 chairs at it. Nell comes on Sundays when the drive isn't bad. She's licensed now. Pediatrics. Her mother has a job she likes at a nonprofit in Marion, and if you want to know how I know that, it's because I ask. Once a month. I call, she picks up, and we talk about our daughter like 2 people who did one thing very badly and one thing very well. I still date the page before I write on it. That's the only piece of advice I've got, and it isn't really about surveying. Write down what you see when you see it, before you know what it means, before you've decided who's at fault. The meaning comes later. The measurement has to be taken now. If this story stayed with you, and you'd like to hear more true-to-life stories of secrets and quiet justice, tap the video on your screen now. I'll be waiting for you there.